What's up, YouTube? Today we are looking at Scalar 3, and oh boy, are there a ton of really crazy new features in the plugin. So this is a sponsored video. However, that being said, they haven't asked to see the video beforehand, so what you're getting is my raw, unfiltered opinion. I also just want to say that in an industry, or frankly a world which is so wrought by AI, seeing companies do stuff like this which helps people actually be more creative, it helps people learn about music theory and actually use it in a constructive method. I think that's something to be commended because it's a actual human tool that humans can use. I support it just for that reason as well. It's a great tool, and for those who haven't actually been following the channel for too long, one of the first plugin videos that I think I ever did on this channel was about Scalar 1. I've kind of supported them from the beginning because I think it's such a powerful tool. Anyway, with that being said, let's dive into the video and have a look at some of these really crazy new features that they've got in the plugin. So I say plugin, but Scalar 3 has pretty much evolved to the point where it's basically its own whole DAW. You can both use it as a standalone app, so you don't necessarily need a DAW to load it inside. And you can also load your own VST plugins directly inside Scalar to audition chords, but also to create multi-channel arrangements directly inside Scalar. So we have a timeline here, and we can add multiple tracks, and then in those tracks we can select multiple VST channels. So we could load something like a UVI strings orchestra and then audition that with all the different scales and the chords. But we can also load stuff like our own reverb plugins or stuff like that here directly inside the plugin. Okay, so we're barely even using Scalar at this point. We're just loading a VST plugin, putting some effects and stuff like that. But I think one of the coolest things about this, in previous versions of Scalar, it generated scales and chords for you. But at the end of the day, it was like, how does all of this fit together? How does this all kind of create a sophisticated piece of music? And to go from the chords and the scales into something more developed and more sophisticated was quite a tough job for somebody who really wasn't that sort of clued up on music theory, right? And so this whole new system where we can create like a multi-channel arrangement, and you could perhaps have like a lead on a different instrument, and then when you change the chords and when you try out new scales, it kind of all adapts to that system, I think is truly clever. So what I want to do is I want to use the browser to find some kind of scale or something that I don't particularly use very often. So I think another really huge improvement is the UI and UX of the plugin. Previously, we weren't really able to, minimize things like this, and we weren't able to, for example, there was no kind of searching for chords and scales via different moods and that kind of thing. It was all very much based on a set of presets or artists and that kind of thing. And so here, this is really cool. We have this kind of search bar where we could search for something like a dreamy mood. Oh, we have a whole category of dreamy moods. So we can kind of search through these based on kind of like different moods, right? And then what it does is it basically drills down to a bunch of scales which would probably work well in that kind of mood that you're looking for. So this is really, really cool for folks, like I said, who are not too clued up on music theory, and you're maybe writing a piece of music where, like, say, for example, it's for a film or for a game, and it's really based on a mood rather than a groove. As electronic music producers, we're so used to writing things based on a groove that, like, we kind of forget about the sort of more emotional aspect of music and how to kind of really capture that in a sort of more simpler method, just using strings or pianos or something like that. And this is a really helpful tool to be able to do so. Now, because we've loaded up our own custom VST inside there, when we run through these scales and we audition them, it's going to automatically play it with that sound which we're familiar with, right? And so in previous versions, if you wanted to do this, it was a pretty hefty setup of like running the MIDI from one channel into the other. That sounds kind of cool. E harmonic major scale. Heroic, mysterious, and majestic. That sounds like that could work pretty well for a sort of game atmosphere backtrack kind of thing. So here what we can do is we could either audition the chords here and then change the voicing and then load it up into that arrangement like this. Or what we could do is we can right click here and we can use this pattern fill, which will automatically generate us a set of chords which will most likely work, right? I think this is truly powerful because, you know, for me, for example, I don't know too much about chord voicing and all that kind of thing. For me, it's truly like going by ear. But when we're looking for something so complex with like multiple layers, just starting off going by ear can be very difficult. It's nice to just kind of have something like a sort of backing to fall back on and then go by ear. Do you know what I mean? The stuff that you add to that is kind of going by ear, right? And so once we've pattern filled here, it should automatically generate us these chords in the arrangement. So we've actually got a loop section here, and then we can drag this so that it captures that entire 8-bar loop. So we can go in and actually edit these if we want to, one by one, or we can zoom in and change like the timing of them. We can drag them and rearrange them. We can change the like snap point here at the top right, and then that gives us a little bit more resolution. So for example, we could have this starting a bit early or late, etc. But like I said, just for this, I'm going to keep it pretty straightforward, because we're going to be working with multiple layers. And then what I like to do is actually just render things out as either as a sample, which I can then chop up and use with like a break or something like that, or I will render out the MIDI and then really fine tune the timings and that kind of thing in the actual in a MIDI editor like the DAW. But here what we can do is we can click add channel, and then here again we have a variety of different things which we can choose from: expressions, moods, genres, articulations. So here we can choose an accompaniment to go with that sort of main chords that we've picked. You see it'll automatically adapt to the scales and the chords that we've picked. So I'm not big on this last chord, this F sharp minus 7th. So what we can do, I believe we can do it from here as well. We can right click and say edit chord, and then it pulls up the create page. And then from here, we can actually audition several different chords. So here, these are chords that Scalar suggests based on this arrangement. But this is really cool because you can actually go in and customize your own chords. But let's just try a couple of these different chords from this selection. Okay, so one cool thing here that I've discovered is the sketch page. So what this allows you to do is basically, you know what we were doing here about like swapping out the last chord. So here it basically allows you to audition, or it can also generate multiple different chord progressions, which you can kind of jump through and see which ones you prefer the most. So it's a little bit easier than doing this, like removing and trying it out and then playing the whole thing, because you kind of get a little bit more of an immediate representation of the sounds, right? You have various different kind of styles which you can choose here to generate from then. Okay, this pizzicato actually sounds a little bit ridiculous. Let's take this out. In the timeline editor, when you're adding new tracks, I should probably mention that we also have more traditional like arpeggiators, strums, passages, that kind of thing. But one thing to note, as far as I know, if we choose a particular, so let's say, for example, if we choose performance adagio, then we can only, like, once we've added the track, it adds the track based on this parameter. So then we can only cycle through these styles. So over here, if we select this channel, we can't then go back into the arpeggiators and that kind of thing. So it doesn't really matter too much, but it's just one thing to note. If you're setting up like a complex patch and you kind of get too in the weeds, I would say first figure out what sort of track you want before doing too much of this kind of sound design stuff, like choosing what sound you want and that kind of thing, because you can't really fall back into this menu. Do you know what I mean? You're limited here to just these performance-based things. It kind of makes sense because the phrases and the melodies, those, the sort of root notes and stuff change in those. So it generates the track differently based on that, I guess. Another cool thing is here, we've got this humanize setting. So we can say whether we want to humanize the velocity, the timing, both. We want to swing it or quantize it. So I usually just switch on humanize both on all these channels. Okay, so how do I use these actually like in a project? Because I guess that's like the most important part, right? Like I said, I usually use these as like a springboard to kind of inspire ideas for other things that might be like a sound design or a backtrack type of thing. Yeah, I think one interesting technique that I like to use is to use granular synthesis. So I'm going to use Serum 2 for this, but you don't necessarily need to use Serum 2. I know inside Ableton Live Suite, there's the granulizer, and Bitwig's sampler actually has like a granular engine. Phaseplant has a granular system as well. So there's various methods which you can use to do this, but I'm kind of really enjoying Serum 2 lately. So I'm just going to use Serum 2 for this. We can drag the sample over and just drop it on granular over here. And let's set this to manual. I want to turn the level up over here. So now it's essentially just looping that first part of the sample, right? And we can scrub through it with this position knob. But usually what I like to do is just to add like a little bit of offset. Let's use the direction. So what this does is every time a grain is regenerated, it chooses whether it plays forwards or backwards. I've actually recently done a tutorial on Serum 2's granular engine, so you should check that out if you want a little bit more of an in-depth rundown of how this works. We can also randomize the pan. With these kinds of things, I usually want like a longer length. Okay, and then we can use this position. Let's zoom out again. We can use this position to choose a different root note. Let's add some reverb here. Okay, let's try it with the strings. Let's give it some attack and some release so it feels a bit more like an atmospheric pad. We can maybe add a filter to this one. That could be interesting. I know with this kind of thing, we're not really using like the power of scalar, you know, like any kind of string thing would work here. But for me, it's all about what sparks that inspiration, right? We could end up going into creating like an orchestral piece or something like that. But for me, like I don't do too much of that kind of music. I really like just making a bunch of loops and using that as a sort of jump off point. And I feel like the new features in Scalar, like having the VSTs and stuff all built in there and stuff, and just being able to export that as audio, it just makes that whole process so much quicker, right? For me, it was like I had project templates dedicated to just doing that, and now it's a standalone app, so I don't even need to potentially open up the DAW. It could all just happen, create these loops and stuff before even opening projects. Do you know what I mean? Which I think is a super powerful technique. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Big shout out to Scalar3 for making this video happen. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Please don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.